My name's Randall Bills. I've been working in the industry 14, 15 years now. I started out working at FASA Corporation as an assistant developer, so I worked on Battletech and Shadowrun, Earth Dawn. When FASA closed, I then started working with WizKids, as well as FamPro, who took on the licenses to continue Battletech and Shadowrun. And then 3 years ago, when FamPro, for various reasons, lost the licenses to Battletech and Shadowrun, I was part of a company, part of a number of people who were able to form a new company called Catalyst Game Labs to take over those licenses. So that's kind of what we're known for currently. We celebrated 25 years of Battletech and 20 years of Shadowrun this year, and came out with some, what I hope is some pretty cool products to help celebrate that. I got a couple of novels under my belt, so been doing a lot of that. And then as part of Catalyst and part of the demoing that I'm doing is we have a whole new series of games that we're trying to come out with, some casual games, some more in-depth games, you know, like we published Eclipse Phase, which is a transhuman conspiracy and horror hard sci-fi role-playing game. We have an alternate history miniatures game coming out, and then, you know, just some casual board games and card games. And so so that's a little bit about me, so you know where I'm coming from. So what we're doing here at this seminar is talking about how do you take game mechanics and use that to enhance a particular setting. I've never been a big proponent or believer in the whole D20 craze that occurred, because I felt that robbed a very powerful tool of the person crafting a game to help enhance that gameplay. You know, if you think of some of the favorite games that you've played, and certainly that's the case with me, and there's always a unique system that goes along with that. Now, part of it, of course, is from a game developer standpoint, I like to see, has somebody done something cool and new? Is somebody doing something different? But at the same time, there really can be a case where the system itself accentuates that flavor. You know, if you think of some of the points that I had written down was, you know, for example, when Vampire came out, it was one of the first games to really push storytelling as the biggest part of the role-playing experience. And to do that, it had amazingly stripped down rules and the whole rock, paper, scissors resolving mechanic. And I can remember initially kind of laughing like, you're kidding, right? Rock, paper, scissors? But then when you actually participated in it, and you realize that far more than doing a pose test and rolling dice, the rock, paper, scissors had you standing right in front of that other person, as though you're actually interacting with him. And again, it was telling a story in a much stronger way than just traditional throwing of the dice. Some of the others I have is, I don't know if anyone here has played Earth Dawn before, but Earth Dawn had a system where you basically used all your polyhedrals, and then you mixed, as you had more and more difficult tests, and as you got better, the combination of dice, which would create your different bell curves, would increase. And so when I play, and it was open-ended. So if I'm the windling rolling that D4, if I keep rolling fours, I can just keep going. And one of the themes of Earth Dawn is it basically was fantasy superheroes. And so you could have this feeling of taking the magics around you and combining it within the dice to throw these big piles of dice, and then, you know, nothing but open-ended, as, you know, suddenly the magic's flowing through you, and you get to do these super cool feats. And so again, the mechanics that were built into it helped to accentuate that. I know some of you guys were mentioning, well, I know you're talking about Battletech. Not so much the core mechanic of the 2d6 roll, because that's pretty basic, but some of the more in-depth ways of how they did it. You know, for example, you sandpaper away the armor. So you have these big mechs, and as you're rolling and doing damage, you're actually sandpapering away the armor. You track the armor, and then once you punch through the armor, you then can do critical damage and suddenly drop the mech down, leaving most of the mech still functional. And that helped to accentuate the setting, particularly when it was originally introduced, of having a whole scavenger mentality where we couldn't really build these things anymore that well, and so you're going to not completely destroy it, but you're going to knock parts of it down so it can't fight anymore, and that's going to allow you to salvage that and take pieces off and put it on your own mechs, and so on. One of the newest games that I've been working on, Leviathans, is its alternate history air action game where basically the fleets of wet navies around the world have risen into air navies around the world. And one of the things I wanted to try to create in a field is more Ironsides oriented. So when the first Ironside ships came out, the Monitor and the Merrimack, they fought all day long. They just pounded away each other, and they couldn't get through the armor because the defensive side of things had advanced at a faster rate than the offensive side of things. And so, as opposed to, say, games where you're wearing away armor or tracking armor, in Leviathans, you make a single roll, and you either go past a breach number and actually do some damage, or you don't do any damage at all. And so that was a case where I didn't initially have that game mechanic in mind, but I evolved into that game mechanic as I solidified the universe and realized that because this is still a relatively new technology of these flying ships, that they can't mount the giant guns that the wet navy can. So this is a case where the defensive armaments have outstripped the offensive armaments. And so that fit really well with the story we wanted to tell. So I needed to modify the game mechanics to kind of help reflect that as well. So there's just a couple of ideas that I had penciled down about my own personal experiences, both designing but also just playing from way back in the day, of games that I could quickly zero in on and realize that, wow, the game mechanics themselves are helping to immerse me better within the universe. So, I mean, do you guys have any kind of examples yourselves like that of games that you love to play that kind of do the same thing, that you can immediately go, oh yeah, it's because of this type of game mechanic that is why I love the game so much? Or yeah.
I'm a big fan of Cthulhu Tech, specifically because the dice mechanic involves you roll a bunch of 10-sided dice, and then it's not just adding them up or whichever one's highest, but if you have like doubles or triples they add together, or if you have a bunch in a row they add together. So it's like playing a little bit of poker with the dice. So rolling the dice is almost a game in and of itself. It's not just another way to resolve tasks. It's actually fun to do. And then you can spend drama points to add more dice, so it gives... That's one thing I absolutely love, is systems that have ways for people to say, I really need to make this work, so I am going to... I'm not just going to abide by what the dice say. I'm going to do something to, take my destiny into my own hands.
Excellent. That's a great example. Does anybody else have any comments?
I can make a comment.
Sure. Comment away, please.
Well, probably a game that you helped with, MechWarrior, then Dark Age, had the heat dial, which was new for HeroClix, because you already had the HeroClix base, but now you added another element, which is heat, and it's just something you have to take into account. Well,
that is a good example, because the reason they added that entire thing is because the MechWarrior Dark Age was based on the BattleTech universe, and the entire feel of the BattleTech universe is this heat that you're constantly having to deal with. The MechWarrior's in the cockpit dealing with all of this. And so being able to, not only did you have to create a mechanic, but that was actually an instance where it went far beyond the game mechanic into, you actually had to get into the engineering of how do you engineer the model itself to handle that.
The other thing I really liked about the heat mechanic is it really did help to reinforce the idea of BattleTech, especially in the early years, as all being about resource management. You can't just walk up to someone and fire all your guns. You have to choose what you're going to fire when, because if you generate too much heat, you fall over. Just like, am I really going to field my best mechs here, and risk them getting hurt? There were always resources you had to manage, and it was. I still enjoy my favorite BattleTech video game is still the absolute first Mech Warrior, where they still had the heat system exactly like it was in the pen and paper game.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Those are good examples. But one of the things I was going is that when you're designing a universe and you're designing a game, if you are moving beyond a role-playing game, like if it's just going to be a role-playing game and it's just printed materials all you have to worry about, then there are times when you can be a little freer. Whereas if you're designing, say, like a board game that's going to have components, and the way in which the mechanics are designed requires certain types of components, then that brings in a whole other level of a mess that you have to deal with. Suddenly you're looking at, pricing it, and that's actually been one of the most painful experiences I've had in the last year or two, is as we're getting our new casual games up and going off the ground, and with Leviathans, is, I come up with this really cool thing, and it's got all these little tchotchkes and little bits and pieces to make it work, and then you put the spec sheet together and you send it off to the manufacturer, and they send it back, and you about pass out as you realize how much it's all going to cost, and suddenly you're like, well, how can I maybe strip it back a little bit? How can I do the same thing without as many components? So that is again, 2 or 3 years ago, I never really thought about that because I'd spent so much of my career dealing with just paper. You'd open the book, you read the rule, like the BattleTech rule books. We're on our 5th or 6th of the giant new core BattleTech rule books, and I can just go to my heart's desire at wacky new rule stuff. Now, a really important thing is it's not so much when you're designing at the front. Obviously, you can be almost as wacky as you want, but similar to a universe that is active. Comics have this all the time, movies do it too, everybody. If you have an active universe, as soon as you publish something, it's canon. And we've all heard the stories, we've probably all experienced it ourselves, about how your own fans, if you're not careful, can flog you over your own canon when you mess it up. Game mechanics can be the same way. Once you've established that your game is going to feel a certain way when you play it, if you go too far beyond that feel, your players aren't going to like that. And again, I apologize right now. I'm probably going to use BattleTech as a lot of example because I've spent most of my career working on that game system. There are certain aspects, there are certain technologies, for example, that if I ever introduced them into BattleTech would completely violate the BattleTech aesthetic and could get a lot of upset customers. If I suddenly wanted to come in and introduce nanotechnology, if I wanted to introduce, some type of energy shields, there are just certain levels of technologies that are perfectly fine tropes that work just fine in a lot of other settings, but that's not how BattleTech was set up. So that's another thing, particularly after you've launched a particular game, that you've got to be very careful of, is to realize the boundaries within what you can do with your own game mechanics. Actually, I just thought of another example that I'd written down. Diplomacy is a brilliant example of game mechanics designed to enhance play. There's no dice rolling. It's all just trying to negotiate the guy next to you and the other people next to you. And in the backstab, in fact, we were just having the conversation, some of the games we've played in where, it's almost detonated and people have left because they got so upset, because they got so emotionally involved in it, because the way in which the mechanics are done, that it's all talking and negotiations, you get so wedded into it that when somebody stabs you in the back, which, by the way, is the entire purpose of the game, they still get that upset about it. They lose the fact that that's what they're trying to do to that guy. And it's one of the reasons I don't play a lot of diplomacy, but it's one of the reasons why I rank it up as one of my all-time favorite game designs, because it is so simple and yet so easily carries people off into the game world. Let's see, what's some other... I know you've done work. Have any of the others, have you done work in the industry before? You're looking to try to break into the industry?
I'm trying. I'm trying
Thank
to
you,
start
Bob.
up my own miniatures company, which is why I'm actually.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I mean that in the best way, but
No, I've heard that from a couple other people that it's really difficult. So yeah.
okay. Now, is it more like a tabletop miniatures play, or okay?
Yeah, tabletop miniatures, kind of like a cross between like War Machine and Games Workshop. Type
Okay.
games right now is kind of what we're going for. Ancient history, Roman type feel.
Okay, that's excellent. Another, and again, some of this may be a little too blatant, you know, and I apologize for that. But you know, it's more about let's cover all the bases. One of the things as you're going down there is you need to be very aware of what's out there. Like, I used to have conversations with a friend of mine who's in a band, and he had pretty much stopped listening to anything new that was coming out. And I'm like, how can you be innovative, and how can you be looking for a good sound and change your own sound if you're totally ignoring everything else that's out there? And you know, and his point was, oh, it's all crap. I'm like, okay, I'll give you that, it's a fair amount, but you're always going to find something new out there that blows you away. And that applies to movies. If you're a movie director, you better be out there seeing what people are doing. Same with a writer. I couldn't imagine being a novelist and not out there reading constantly and seeing what people are doing, because you know, you need to see where the trends are, you need to see what's popular. You know, one of the whole reasons we started down the Leviathan's path, there's a lot of reasons, but one of the biggest reasons is even a year ago we could see that the steampunk genre was really on the rise. You know, and so you got to go, okay, well, I don't want to be the guy that just runs out and jumps on every fad. But if we have a really cool universe concept, which we did, and if we're able to generate a cool game mechanic to go with it, and then you pair that up with a fad, that's a whole other thing. And really that's how a lot of things, particularly like Battletech, came about that way. Vampire, by sheer almost accident, rode off of the Anne Rice novels that were originally coming out, and that whole rise of the urban fantasy. So as you're doing your game design, you know, it's quite often there's this image of a developer, and it the same applies certainly to novelists and writers, is, you know, you're just in this vacuum, you're sitting in front of the keyboard and the doors are all shut and you're just banging away. And that's a sure recipe for disaster, because you need to be very aware of lots and lots of different elements. The miniature side in particular, because there's just so, you know, it gets akin to the computer game, in that I have a lot of people who've transferred over from the adventure game hobby into the computer game side. And one of their biggest complaints is, at the end of the day, I can always publish my book, or I can always publish the role-playing game. And it may not be very good, but I can publish it and I can at least get something back. Whereas, you know, you can spend 3 and 4 years working on a computer game, and at the end of the day, you plug all the parts in and press go, and the screen's just blank. And so miniature games can kind of be like that it's so expensive. There's sculpting and modeling and all these other aspects that go far beyond just a game mechanic. They all have to be very aware of, and balancing and looking at everything, and also being willing to compromise. You know, Dave Stansel is Catalyst's operations manager, and his job is to make sure that it comes out as cheaply as possible, and my job is to have it come out as cool as possible. And quite often you're bumping heads, and you need to first of all, you need to have the operations manager above you. You need to have somebody who's stomping down on you to not overwrite by 100,000 words, which, by the way, I've done, to not, you know, make the game with 10,000 components that's going to cost, you know, $20 just to get it out of China. You know, these are the type of things. But at the same time, you also need to be confident enough with your own abilities and with the game design that you're doing, so that you can also push back and go, no, we need to do it this way. Okay, let's see if we can find a compromise. So particularly in your cases, you're trying to create a new company. Good, talented, key people, I can't say that enough times. You know, we launched Catalyst with, about 4 or 5 core people. Now, we had a fair number of freelancers that we kind of inherited, but it was only like 3 to 5 key people that we were able to launch with. And we all had amazing amounts of sweat equity that we had to pile it into it, but we all had the skills necessary in our various spheres of influence, and we all complemented each other well enough to do that. And I apologize if it feels maybe like I'm going a little bit beyond just the game mechanics side, but I feel really strongly that you can't just look at game mechanics. Even as you're talking about how do you make a mechanic enhance the universe, well, that doesn't mean anything if you can't even get it out the door. So is there any other kind of questions or thoughts that have been popping up? I'm a big believer in getting feedback, so feel free. If you came with some questions, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, one of my biggest thing is at what point do you decide that fluff does not equal rules, or rules do not equal fluff? Like, in a lot of games, War Machine's one of my favorites. I play that most often. One of the big examples is a lot of the time the stories that you read about the characters you play don't translate into the game itself. Because the game itself has to be balanced. You can't have these super powerful characters running around everywhere. So at what point do you go, okay, this, like, where do you get to make that decision? Because, you know, I'm starting my own company and we've got the fluff going, and it's 3 guys. We love playing games, and, you know, we've been wanting to do this for years, so we're going way above and beyond what a realistic game would play like. So, you know, what steps can we take to tone that back down to actually create a balanced game?
That is a superb question. It's actually interesting. My personal belief is that the more abstract a system is, the more you're likely going to be able to get away with. So like a tabletop game like War Machine, fairly abstract compared to like Battletech, which is tons and tons of nuts and bolts. So in Battletech, and again, part of that is the weight of inertia. You know, we have 25 years of weight bearing down on us, and you have to pay respect to that. It's a wonderful legacy that we all lived through, that we experienced, that we helped create. So you gotta pay homage to that. So you know, there are many wonderful instances where an author will want to make a choice in a novel that's a good story choice, but that just flat breaks the game continuity. And that one's a little easier, again, because the depth of play, or actually, excuse me, it's a little more difficult because the depth of play hampers the authors. But I'm a big believer that the Battletech's a fun game to play, but without the setting and the original novels that so sucked us into it, it wouldn't be around today. I think most games are that way. Shadowrun's really that way because its first edition rules were horrific, but the universe was so unique and different, it allowed it to survive to the second edition where, oh wow, these rules almost work, so I'll just tweak them a little bit and do it. You know, I still remember all of us being Battletech players, and Shadowrun was a facet game, so we're going to run out and give it a try, and we all ran out the day it came out and all bought the book, and within a week it was on the shelf because we couldn't do anything with it. My personal feeling is I'm almost always going to side on giving the author leeway to do what's going to be a good story. But I can't tell you where to actually draw the line. I can say lean. I absolutely would lean in allowing the fiction writers to tell the stories that are going to carry the fans into your universe. But then, and part of it's probably going to be a little bit of trial and error. You know, you're going to figure out that trial and error within your own group, you know, your own company, but also sometimes trial and error with the fans. You know, there's a wonderful example of, once again, apologize for using Battletech, but I'm just going to keep going. So really early on, there was a character in Battletech Morgan Kell, who basically had psionics. So Battletech has no magic in it, it has no psionics, and it just so happened this one character, for his storyline, got these psionics, and somehow the fans bought into it. So it's basically magic. We introduced magic into this completely military sci-fi world, and the fans bought it because of the way that Mike Stackpole wrote it, the way he put it together. We've had some other instances where you have like an elite mech pilot in a mech, and in a light mech, and she did a handstand in the mech, and the fans crucified us for it. Oh, the mechs aren't that agile. That's not what you set up as your aesthetic. That's a Japanese anime style, Robotech, Gundam, some of these other ones. That's not what you can do in a mech in Battletech. And while to a certain extent I understand where they're coming from, the whole time I'm thinking, but you allowed this author to put magic into this universe, and you were just fine with it. But the difference is again, the way in which the story was done. The skill level of the first was just far superior than the second. Fans bought off on the first one. They absolutely would not buy off on the second one. So that was a great question. Do you have any others? Mike?
I guess most of my concerns right now are we're essentially like 80% done with the game. Right now it's just technical stuff like verbiage and make sure the rules read right. But it's also balancing between everything. Like, I know you're working on Leviathan. I've been following that since I first heard about that, and loving everything that I've seen.
Thank you.
But so, like, how do you go about balancing all the various factions to make sure that each one's a unique snowflake, but one isn't larger and more powerful than the other?
Well, the fun example is, for example, like any Battletech player that's been a long time Battletech player, when they see Leviathans, their immediate thought is, who's Davian? And what I mean by that is that Davian was kind of like the white hat characters. They were the good guys. They almost always got away with stuff more than anything else. And so because of that experience of living through and watching that happen, I've been flogging myself pretty hard to not go that route. Now, so far as, now you're also talking like how to enhance the flavor in the game mechanics itself?
Yeah, mainly like...
Or how do you balance the factions so they each feel unique, but they're balanced together?
A combination of both, like within the mechanics itself and, I mean, fluff, that's really not my thing. My friend is writing the fluff. I'm really just doing the mechanics and the gameplay itself, so that's kind of where my mind's going.
Okay.
Is more within the mechanics. Like, a good example for me of, I'm not putting down Games Workshop. I love Games Workshop. I used to work for them. I started my miniature career with Games Workshop. But when it comes to terms of balance, they go from really good to there's no point in even playing this army because they're so overpowered. What I really want to avoid is that, Demons of Chaos, Vampire Counts type. Okay.
A couple of ways to do that. One, and again, this is going to sound kind of silly, but play test. Play some more. Play until you're sick, until you are so sick of your own game that you can't even pick up the dice to roll the dice again. I cannot stress enough. Like we have half of the rules are in layout, and I'm still playing the game. And if I find some hole, I'm going to go into the layout files and tweak it. Find good playtest groups are golden. I have some guys that are fabulously good at being able to just shred any rules you hand them. And you can't get upset at them. There's no ego involved in here. You have to realize that, again, it's kind of back to the diplomacy thing. Why are you getting mad at the fact that I stabbed you in the back when that's the purpose of the game? Their job is to destroy your rules. And once you've reached a stage where they can't really destroy them, that's when you're done. So fantastic playtest groups, but you have to play it yourself. If you are making your own company and you are designing your own game, you have got to have the confidence that you know what you're bringing to the table is good. And that means, and it's all your own experience, and that means you have to be able to play it and you have to be able to go, this is it. And it's kind of like the whole, that great ask a politician, what's pornography and what's art? And he'll say, I can't tell you, but I'll know it when I see it. A great example of that is BattleTech did a mass action combat game called Battle Force way back in the day. And it tanked. It just didn't do anything. We probably went through maybe 20 versions of a core game. And literally there were days when Brian would walk in the early morning and bang out a core game mechanic, and by the afternoon we're going into the conference room to sit, toss some dice, and within 5 minutes we're like, nope, doesn't feel like BattleTech. Throw it all in the garbage can, walk back and do it again. So that's the other thing, is you have to be willing to go, you know what, it's not working. Authors quite often can write several chapters in a book or write a big short story, and they cannot bring themselves to admit that it's not working at any level. And they'll go in and they'll try to fix it and try to fix it. And fixing a story that's broken is an editor's job. Most writers are not editors. So the more they try to fix it, the more they just screw it up. And so you have to go, you know what, I just wrote this 10,000 word short story. It fails at every level, toss it in the garbage can. And go write another story, and then maybe 6 months down the line, go write that story again that you threw in the garbage can, and it'll be fixed. You yourself, your conscious, all the skills you have, you're going to fix yourself, you know. And so the game mechanics are kind of the same way. You've got to be willing to go, wow, this is just not working. And I've done that a couple of times, and kind of was butting head with one of my playtesters, and he was going, no, you're not seeing what I'm talking about. There's a critical flaw in Leviathans. And I'm going round and round with him like, I'm just not seeing it. But I trusted him enough, because he had cut through so many of my other issues with me, that I trusted him to keep going round and round until we finally got on the same page, and I'm like, oh my gosh, how did I not see that problem? So those are a couple of those points. And then the same thing with flavor. Flavor is all about, being able to play a faction and then, play another faction that has the exact same kind of units, and being able to just like go, oh yeah, that feels different. Also, even way beyond your regular playtesters, just grab gamers, people that people that you trust, and go, put your butt in the chair, toss some dice. How does this feel? Does this feel different than this other one that we just did last week? And then power creep, that's the eternal damnation problem of every game under the sun. I don't, I don't know, I believe it's almost impossible to fully proof yourself against it. And the reason why is, and I'm certainly in the same boat, we all like our new toys. I've been playing this game for a year or two, it's great, give me something cool and new to throw on the table. What I tried really hard to do in Leviathans was to ensure that various aspects of the weapons feel really different. Actually, BattleTech's another great example. There's a lot of weapon systems in BattleTech that the flavor says they do different things, but in the game, they all have the exact same game mechanic. So you have an autocannon 10, giant machine gun, and a PPC. One's a giant energy blast. One generates some heat more than the autocannon does, but when it strikes the armor on the guy across the field, you mark off 10 points of damage both. What time is it, by the way?
2:43.
Thank you. So in the latest round, in some of the latest books in Tactical Operations, which is an advanced rules book for Battletech, we introduced some new weapons, and it was incredibly difficult to introduce these weapons. I cannot believe how much time we spent, because first, you have the weight of all of these weapon systems, dozens upon dozens that are already out there, so you have to put in a weapon system that does a new thing, that feels different as you're playing, and it can overpower anything else that you've done. And it was just astonishing to me how difficult that can be. Now, obviously, you don't necessarily have that at the very beginning. But to my mind, as you're designing the game, you should be looking 3 years out. You know, it shouldn't just be, what's the next 2 or 3 products that I should do? No, I have, like Leviathans, I have it planned out, 3 years of products. Do I even know if the game's going to be able to go that long? It can come out in 6 months, it's dead, no one wanted it, and I, hopefully still have a job and we move on to something else. But I am planning not just the fiction, not just how to roll it out, but I'm planning what are the new flavors that are going to be introduced that can be plugged in. And I'm play testing a lot of some of the embryo of that material now, as the game is still in its early development. So even if some of the rules don't come out for 2 years, I play tested them against the core mechanic right up front. So that's kind of some of what I have done to try to protect against that, to know that, okay, you've got to grow, you've got to introduce cool new things, but I'm going to try to do it in such a way that I know it's coming and it's going to be a better plug and play. It's not just slather it on the top. Battletech was released, and it was supposed to be a beer and pretzels game. They put it out there, they were already moving on to other things. And suddenly it detonated. And they were selling like crazy. And the joke used to be way back in the day that they could not produce a box and call it X-Tech fast enough in the late 80s to get them out the door. And because of that speed, you had a lot of situations where just too much stuff was being slathered on there. And the clans come around, and there's just lots of problems that arose that then the rest of us, way after the fact, have to spend lots and lots of time trying to even out a little bit better. So I mean, that's kind of, hopefully that gave you some ideas and concepts, I hope.
So I'm not a game designer, but I am a software guy, a computer guy. And one thing that I don't hear people talk about enough is the difference between alpha playtesting and beta playtesting. Alpha, I don't know if you know, I don't want to patronize you. Alpha, that's when you're there with the players so they can ask you questions. Beta, you give it to them and you walk away. They have no input from you of any kind. They have to figure out by themselves, and then they come back to you with what they think. And I can't, at least computer-wise, I can't tell you how important that is. And I don't know if it's the same gaming-wise, but you cannot be there for a lot of this playtesting, because if you are, the very fact that someone can say, hey, what's this? And you're like, oh, that's blah. And it never gets into the rules.
No, actually, that is critical. A great example of that, and this is whether you have the skill now or you need to develop the skill or you will develop the skill. One of the new card games that we're demoing out here is called Ergo, where you basically are, the concept is using classical rules of logic. We take on the roles of variables, and then you either prove your existence while disproving the existence of other players. So if you're like a computer programmer or that type of person, you will love this game. When the game designers demoed the game to us, literally on the spot, because he could explain it to us on the spot, we bought the game. It was that cool of a concept. They then turn over the page of rules that they had for it, and there's no conceivable way under the sun that we could have figured out how to play this game based upon those rules. So if we had just taken those and packaged it up and thrown it out, it would have been devastating to it. And so that actually is a great example. And so yeah, like when I'm first putting rules out, going back to Leviathans, when I put Leviathans out for the first time, kind of the alpha testing, I would often put giant pages of explanation of, this is what I'm trying to go for. You're going to ask this question, so I'm going to answer it right now, to try to stave off a little bit of the endless back and forth flow that can happen. But you do reach a point, and that you want to have, in the best of both worlds, and sometimes it's hard to do in the best of both worlds, you want to have like 2 and 3 play tests, and each time you want to see, a good 20 to 40% increase in the number of people who are playing. And part of that increase is to ensure that you're getting people who are seeing the game fresh without you having to have explained anything. So, my first emails, and I can be incredibly verbose in my emails because I want to make sure everyone knows exactly what I'm doing. They're just monsters. And then by that final last play test, I'm sending out an email saying, okay, pre-final proofing, mean laid out, PDF of the rules, I just uploaded it, your ship cards are up there, you got 4 weeks, and that's it. That's all they get. And so thank you for bringing that up. That's an excellent example. You've been kind of quiet. You okay? You're good? Just kind of quiet person? Well, good. Either one of you have any more comments or questions? Looks like we're kind of, sort of wrapping up a little bit.
What are some bad game mechanics you've seen?
Oh, goodness. No.
What are some bad game mechanics you've seen?
Well, I want to be really careful because I don't want to be bashing on. I think there's 2 different levels. It's actually not as easy to respond to, I think, as you would think. I think there's actually 2 or 3 different levels to what someone might call bad game mechanics. You can't go too simple. You need those modifiers or you have no tactics of play and the game's not fun to play. There's no repeat play. So I finally figured out that you can take all those modifiers. I had an epiphany one day. Most of those modifiers can be emulated using the bell curves of polyhedron dice. But because of there are times when you can be rolling 5 dice, all of different bell curves, I needed to ensure that all that worked. And so I was able to tap 2 or 3 of my, crazy playtesters that I love to death, some of which are, math majors and all of that put together the sickest spreadsheets you've ever seen to prove that, yes, you have all 5 of these probabilities, and they all come out, and the breach numbers that you just put in that you have to equal or exceed on this ship, it's working like a charm. So at a bare bones, there is that, where you play a game and unequivocally, because you know the math, that this X thing is just broken. And we probably all read into that. However, there are times when the game mechanics may not seem like they work very well, but they work well within the universe. And so you forgive some of the problems that you find because they really do enhance, kind of like the whole, going way back to the very beginning. Game mechanics, in my mind, are there to enhance the play and feel of the universe. And there are times when even the mechanics aren't quite working right, and you may throw your little tweaks in there and stuff, but they're not so bad that they drive you away, but they are constructed in a way that they actually pull you in. And I'm being a little vague because I really don't want to go out and bash anybody's, games, because that's the other thing. It's all subjective. But one of my favorite things year after year is you put out the new book. Art is probably one of the best examples of that. You put out the new book. You start reading the forums of your fans. They're reviewing it. And, one post, this is the suckiest piece ever. And the very next post, this is the best piece ever. So that's one of the reasons why I don't want to go and say, I don't like this game, I like this game, I don't like this game. I would say, I can say that Avalon Hill's Civilization, game mechanics-wise, is probably one of my all-time favorite. I'm in awe of it because it's a 12-hour-long game. It's massive, and you have huge amounts of variables. Yet every time I've played, I haven't played in a long time because I grew up and had kids, and you lose all your playtime. But back in the day, we used to play 1 and 2 times a year. Every single time I played, everyone at the table was right at the very end up there and fighting to see who would win. And I have no idea how they did it. Even I can't imagine how much playtesting. You know, I keep thinking that I would like to think that they just stumbled on it, which happens sometimes. Because I've analyzed and looked at it, and there's just, the variables are so colossal. And yet they built a game where everyone is right there at the very end, even after 12 hours of play, fighting to win. So for me, that's one of the best game designs that I know of. And then, of course, you have a whole scat of the German style, which is, you know, a page, maybe a page and a half of rules. You learn it in 5 minutes, and you can just play it endlessly because the depth of play is a lot in there. So those are kind of some of the mechanics that I really like.
This is not my talk. I'm not going to trash talk a game, but I am going to talk about an example actually of the opposite of what this talk is sort of about. Game mechanics that didn't work, that were absolutely part of the universe. The Elysium book for Vampire the Masquerade was put out specifically to give basically storytellers the ability to create really old vampires. And one of the mechanics was buying age. And age equals power in Vampire the Masquerade. And they had this system where you could buy age as a background, and for 3 or 4 background points, you could build this intensely powerful vampire. And it wasn't really designed for players, but they didn't make it explicit enough. So you end up playing in some vampire games where the storyteller doesn't know that players don't get to use the Elysium handbook. And then they build these 1,000-year-old vampires that just put everyone else to shame. But that it's exactly in with the universe. It fits the feel and the tone perfectly, just not for players, because it turns the power curve into a joke.
Yeah, that's actually a good example. I mean, I can actually think of a couple of different games that have done that. And again, that kind of falls back to power creep, is that there are instances where in this they were trying to showcase a part of the universe in game mechanics that hadn't ever really been showcased before, but in doing so were not clear enough. They knew how to use it. They did not convey that, it sounds like, they did not convey that enough to the players. And again, that comes back to the whole alpha testing, beta testing. Your players will always do things with your rules that you never imagined they will do. And that's the other thing. And you also have to figure out at what point are you going to draw the line for yourselves. For example, in BattleTech, about 4 years ago, are we almost done? Okay, I'll do one last example here. In BattleTech, started this new core line of rules, and because the game had been around for 20 years at that point and been through 5 iterations of rules, everyone had kind of done all these various things. So if I'm going to do a new thing in BattleTech without changing everything, I have to come up with a new style. And that new style philosophy was everything in the kitchen sink. So, the last 2 core rule books have been 400-page tomes where there's everything. I go to the nth degree providing you rules to do everything you have ever read about in a novel. For example, there's in the Blood of Korinsky novels, Phelan Kell runs up with a mech and grabs the turret on a tank and tears it off. Well, until Tactical Operations, you'd never been able to do that. I'm like, well, let's generate a rule for that. And so, but once you start down that path, it's a really slippery slope, because then the fans start expecting you to do everything, and it gets more difficult and more difficult. So and again, I can't really say which way you want to go, but that's just something to be aware of, that you need to figure out where you're going to draw the line. Are you going to be a little more ambiguous and let the players, a little more role-playing style in a minis game, or are you going to do the whole kitchen sink approach where you're going to, try to detail it out to the nth degree? Are we good then, guys? Awesome. Hey, thanks. Appreciate it.